Welcome to our deep dive. We're going to be looking at one of those captivating chapters in Desire of Ages.
Oh, absolutely.
It's chapter 47, Ministry, and we're going to be exploring a moment in Jesus' life that is so powerful. And it reveals so much about the power of faith, even when it feels like you're facing, impossible odds. You know those times when you feel like your faith just isn't strong enough? Like you're up against a mountain you can't move?
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today.
It's amazing how this chapter starts, I mean, we're kind of dropped right into this stark contrast. You have this mountaintop experience brimming with this spiritual awe, and then bam, it's a sudden descent into a valley of struggle and doubt.
It's like going from the most serene meditation retreat straight into rush hour traffic.
It really is.
I mean, the chapter opens with Jesus and three of his closest disciples, Peter, James, and John, coming down from a mountain.
Right.
They've just witnessed the transfiguration. This is where, Jesus was literally glowing and Moses and Elijah show up.
Yeah.
And God's voice booms from heaven. This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. Talk about intense spiritual energy coming down that
It
mountain.
makes you wonder what was going through their minds, this incredible confirmation of Jesus's divinity, the weight of that experience. The chapter says they were silent, just lost in thought.
Yeah.
Processing it all.
And then, boom, reality check. I get to the bottom of the mountain, and they walk straight into chaos.
Yeah.
A huge crowd is waiting there. Everybody's buzzing with anxiety. The other disciples are there looking frazzled.
Right.
And a desperate father is pleading for help for his son who's possessed by a spirit.
I mean, the shift in the scene is so jarring. It's almost like the author was deliberately, shaking us awake.
Yeah.
Pulling us from that serene mountaintop and into the raw reality of human suffering.
You're right. It really does make you feel the weight of the situation. And the chapter doesn't shy away from the details,
Yeah.
This isn't just like any possession.
No.
This boy, he can't speak. He's thrown into these violent convulsions.
Wow.
The spirit is trying to hurt him, flinging him into fire and water. It just paints this picture of a father at his wit's end, desperate for anyone to help his son.
And it really sets the stage for what's to come. This exploration of faith, its potential, its fragility, and how it operates in the face of truly desperate situations.
So here's this father, desperate for a miracle, and he sees the disciples.
Right.
Now remember, they had been given the power to cast out demons before.
Yeah.
In fact, they'd had succeed with it earlier in their ministry. You'd think this would be a slam dunk.
Totally.
Except it totally backfires.
Yeah.
And not just a little backfire.
No.
The demon completely resists them, mocks them, and basically makes a spectacle of their helplessness. Imagine the sting of that humiliation, especially with that crowd watching, buzzing with doubt and skepticism.
Oh, I bet the critics were having a field day.
Oh, yeah.
The chapter mentions these scribes who were always on Jesus' case.
Right. Could you give us a little background on who they were?
Sure. The scribes, they were essentially the religious scholars and the legal experts of the time.
Okay.
They were intensely focused on interpreting and upholding the Jewish law. And let's just say they weren't exactly Jesus's biggest fan.
Right. So they're sitting there watching the disciples fail. And of course, they seize the opportunity.
Absolutely. Questioning their authority, their legitimacy, maybe even suggesting they're frauds.
And that crowd, they start to waver.
Right. That initial spark of hope that maybe these disciples could actually help, it flickers and fades.
Yeah.
It's a potent reminder of how fragile faith can be, how easily doubt can creep in, especially when we see our heroes falter.
Talk about a pressure cooker. And then enter Jesus with that mountaintop glow still lingering around him, along with Peter, James, and John.
The chapter describes this light on their faces. I think that's so symbolic. It's like they're literally radiating the peace and power of their time spent with God.
Yeah.
It speaks volumes about how connecting with the divine can transform us from the inside out, even without us realizing it.
And the crowd instantly feels it. The scribes go silent, and everyone turns to Jesus with this renewed sense of hope.
His presence alone commands attention.
Yes.
It just cuts through all the noise and the chaos. And before he even says a word, he addresses the elephant in the room, the doubt that's hanging heavy in the air, with one question. "O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you?"
Ooh, that's a loaded question.
Yeah.
You can practically hear the frustration in his voice. He's calling them out. He's reminding them of all the miracles they've witnessed. And yet, here they are, doubting again.
And that question isn't just directed at the crowd back then.
Right.
It's a question for us too, isn't it?
Absolutely.
How often do we, despite experiencing God's goodness and power, still struggle with doubt and unbelief?
It's like the human condition, this constant wrestling with faith.
Yeah.
And in the midst of all this tension, the Father sees Jesus and rushes forward and throws himself at Jesus' feet. He begs for his son to be healed. But listen to how he phrases it. If thou canst do anything, have compassion on us and help us.
That, if thou canst, is so revealing. Here's this father desperate to believe, but even in that desperation, a seed of doubt lingers.
Yeah.
He's not entirely sure if Jesus can or will help.
And Jesus, being the master teacher that he is, picks up on that instant.
Yeah.
And his response is one of the most powerful and well-known statements about faith. If thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believeth.
He shifts the focus. It's not about his own ability.
Right.
It's about the Father's belief. It highlights that the miracle hinges on the strength of his faith.
And the Father, hit with this realization of his own wavering faith, cries out, Lord, I believe, help thou mine unbelief. It's so raw and honest, and I think so relatable. We all have those moments where we want to believe, but doubt creeps in. It's this internal battle.
Absolutely. That's what makes the scene so powerful. The
Yeah.
Father isn't pretending to have this perfect faith.
Right.
He's acknowledging his struggle and asking for help. He's saying, I'm trying, God. Meet me where I am.
Yeah.
And it's in that moment of surrender, that raw plea, that Jesus acts.
And the drama unfolds. Jesus commands the spirit to leave the boy, and what follows is intense. The boy convulses, screams, as if the demon is clinging on with all its might.
Right.
But ultimately it's forced out, and the boy lies still, seemingly lifeless.
Talk about a test of faith. Even the crowd starts whispering, he's dead.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that doubt can linger even in the presence of miracles. But Jesus, in this beautiful display of compassion and power, lifts the boy up completely healed and returns him to his overjoyed father.
It's such a moment of victory,
Yeah.
a testament to the transformative power of faith, not just for the boy, but for the father as well.
Yep.
His doubt was met with grace, and his plea for help was answered.
It really was.
But the chapter doesn't end there, does it?
No, it doesn't.
The disciples, still reeling from their failure, approached Jesus perplexed.
And Jesus, in his signature way of cutting straight to the heart of the matter, tells them, because of your unbelief.
Ouch.
And then he uses this brilliant analogy to explain the nature of faith, the mustard seed.
Right, that tiny little seed that grows into this massive plant.
Yeah.
He's saying that even a tiny amount of faith, if nurtured and allowed to grow, can achieve incredible things.
Exactly. It highlights that faith isn't about having this superhuman level of belief.
Right.
It's about a genuine connection with God, however small it may seem, and allowing that connection to flourish through prayer, obedience, and aligning ourselves with his will.
I'm loving this already, and I bet our listeners are too. If you are finding this deep dive into Desire of Ages insightful, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more explorations like this. We'll be back in a moment to unpack this concept of nurturing faith and see what other gems this chapter has in store for us.
Looking forward to it. Welcome back to our deep dive into Desire of Ages. We're unpacking chapter 47, Ministry. And right before the break, we were exploring Jesus' teaching on faith and his rather pointed response to the disciples after their very public failure to heal that possessed boy.
Yeah, he basically told them it was because of their unbelief. And then he introduces this really powerful image of the mustard seed.
Right.
I love that analogy. It's so simple, yet so profound.
It really is. And it speaks to the heart of what faith is all about. You know, it's not about some grand, showy display of belief.
Yeah.
It's about that tiny seed of trust, that willingness to open ourselves up to God's power, even when we can't fully grasp it.
And what's really interesting is that Jesus doesn't stop there. He actually goes on to connect the strengthening of faith with some very specific spiritual practices. Prayer and fasting.
That's a crucial detail, isn't it? He's not just saying have faith. He's giving them and us practical tools to cultivate that faith,
Yeah.
to nurture that connection with the divine.
It's like he's saying faith is a muscle that needs to be exercised.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just passively believe, you know?
Right.
You have to actively engage with your faith.
Exactly. And prayer in this context isn't just about rattling off a wish list to God.
Right.
It's about deepening that relationship, that communication. It's about aligning our hearts and minds with his will, seeking his guidance and wisdom.
And fasting, as it's often understood in Scripture, is a way of humbling ourselves, denying our physical desires to create space for spiritual growth.
Right. It's like saying, okay, world, I'm taking a time out here, you know? I'm stepping away from the distractions and the noise to focus on my relationship with God.
And this instruction comes right on the heels of the disciples' very public failure. It kind of suggests that their lack of faith wasn't just some random fluke, right?
Right. You know, the chapter seems to imply that their internal struggles, their doubts and frustrations, they played a role in their inability to tap into that spiritual power. They weren't in a state of spiritual readiness, so to speak.
It's like trying to run a marathon without training.
Exactly.
You might have the desire, the intention, but without the preparation, you're likely to fall short.
Right.
And the disciples' failure had repercussions beyond their own personal disappointment, right?
No, absolutely. It caused confusion among the people, gave those skeptical scribes more fuel for their attacks, and ultimately undermined their mission to spread the gospel and bring healing to the world.
It highlights how interconnected we are, especially within a community of faith. One person's struggle, one person's wavering faith can have this ripple effect on the entire group.
Absolutely.
And conversely, when a group comes together, united in prayer, fasting, and this shared commitment to God's mission, their collective faith can be incredibly potent.
It's like each individual's faith becomes a thread, and when they're woven together, they create this incredibly strong tapestry, capable of withstanding all sorts of challenges.
And that brings us to the heart of what this chapter is all about, doesn't it?
I think so.
It's a call to action.
Yeah.
It's an invitation to examine our own lives and ask ourselves some really tough questions.
Absolutely.
Like, where are we placing our faith? Are we actively nurturing our relationship with God? Are we relying on our own limited strength, or are we tapping into that limitless power available to us through Christ?
And maybe even more importantly, how is our faith, or lack thereof, impacting those around us? Are we contributing to a culture of doubt and fear? Or are we radiating hope and inspiring others to believe in the impossible?
Wow, those are some big questions. Not always easy to answer, but they're so essential, aren't they?
I think so.
Because ultimately, this chapter isn't just some ancient story about a miracle. It's a timeless message about the transformative power of faith and the responsibility that we have to cultivate it, both for our own good and for the good of the world around us.
You know, what really strikes me is how the fathers cry, "Lord, I believe, help thou mine unbelief." How it resonates so deeply with the human experience.
Oh, absolutely. That raw honesty, that willingness to admit his struggle. I think we can all relate to that, can't we? We all have those moments when our faith is tested.
Absolutely.
When the doubt creeps in.
Yeah. But what's so beautiful is that he doesn't let that doubt paralyze him. He brings it to Jesus. He acknowledges it. And he asks for help.
It's like he's saying, I'm not perfect, but I'm trying. I'm reaching out. Meet me here.
Exactly. And in that moment of vulnerability, he opens himself up to receiving God's grace.
Which is such a beautiful reminder that it's okay to not have it all figured out. To not have perfect faith.
Absolutely.
It's about being honest with ourselves and with God, acknowledging our struggles and allowing him to work in and through our weaknesses.
And it brings us right back to that beautiful analogy of the mustard seed.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even the smallest spark of faith, when planted in the right soil and nurtured, can blossom into something incredible.
It's a reminder that our faith doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be genuine, rooted in God's love and power.
Yeah.
And as we allow that faith to grow, we become capable of things we never thought possible. Just like the disciples, who, despite their initial failure, went on to perform incredible miracles and spread the gospel throughout the world.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating is how this chapter subtly connects the power of faith, not just to spiritual victories, but also to overcoming any obstacle in life.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not limited to just casting out demons or performing miracles. Remember how Jesus talks about moving mountains? That's a metaphor for any challenge, any seemingly impossible barrier that stands in our way.
Exactly. It could be a personal struggle, a relationship issue, a career setback, anything that feels overwhelming.
Yeah.
Like it's blocking our path.
And the message is clear. If we can believe, if we can tap into that unwavering faith in God's power and love, we can move mountains.
Absolutely.
So what does this all mean for us today?
I think it's an invitation and encouragement to identify those mountains in our own lives, those challenges that seem insurmountable, and to remember that no matter how daunting they may seem, the power that raised Jesus from the dead, the power that healed the demon-possessed boy, is available to us as well.
And it all starts with that mustard seed of faith, that willingness to believe, to trust, and to allow God to work in and through us. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question. We've talked about the mountains in our lives, those challenges that seem impossible to overcome. But what if those mountains aren't meant to be moved?
Oh, that's interesting. What if instead of trying to bulldoze our way through them, we're meant to climb them?
Hmm.
What if those mountains, those trials and tribulations are actually opportunities for growth, for transformation, for drawing closer to God? What if they're not obstacles to be removed, but rather stepping stones on our journey of faith?
That's such a powerful reframing. Instead of seeing our mountains as enemies to be defeated, we can view them as challenges to be embraced, opportunities to learn and grow and become more like Christ.
Absolutely.
And maybe, just maybe, as we climb those mountains, as we lean on God's strength and allow Him to work in us, we'll discover that the view from the top is even more breathtaking than we ever imagined.
That's such a beautiful thought to leave us with. And if you're enjoying this journey into the power of faith as much as we are, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into fascinating topics. We'll be right back with the final part of our exploration where we'll delve deeper into how to apply these lessons to our daily lives.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Desire of Ages, Chapter 47, Ministry.
We've been unpacking this incredible story of healing and doubt and the power of faith, and it's been quite a journey so far.
It really has. We've explored the raw emotions of a desperate father, we've witnessed the disciples' struggles, and we've delved into Jesus' profound teachings on faith. And as we've discussed, this chapter, it isn't just some ancient tale.
Right.
It's like a treasure trove of wisdom that speaks directly to our lives today.
Absolutely. So let's get practical. We've talked about faith, prayer, fasting. How do we actually apply these principles in our everyday lives?
Right.
What does it look like to live out that mountain-moving faith that Jesus speaks of?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that faith, it isn't something that we can just switch on and off like a light switch.
Right.
It's a relationship.
Uh-huh.
It's a connection with God that we nurture through consistent effort, just like any other important relationship in our lives.
Yeah.
So it's about making time for God, communicating with Him through prayer, listening to His voice through His word,
Yes.
seeking His guidance in all areas of our lives.
Precisely. It's about showing up, being present, and cultivating that connection. And just as importantly, it's about putting our faith into action.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just say we believe, we have to live it out.
So it's not just about praying for healing, but also taking care of our bodies.
Yes.
Seeking medical advice, making healthy choices.
Exactly. Or if our mountain is a financial struggle, it's not just about praying for provision, but also about being responsible stewards of our resources, seeking wise counsel, working diligently.
Right. It's about that beautiful synergy between faith and action, trusting that as we step out in faith, God will meet us and empower us to overcome whatever obstacles we face.
Absolutely. And this doesn't mean we won't encounter challenges along the way. Remember, even the disciples, after witnessing countless miracles, they still grappled with doubt.
Right.
And the Father, in his desperation, still questioned Jesus' power.
It's like doubt is an inevitable part of the human experience, isn't it?
It is. It's that pesky voice that whispers, "What is?" or "Are you sure?"
But what I find so encouraging in this chapter is that they didn't let those doubts paralyze them.
Absolutely.
They brought their struggles to Jesus, they cried out for help, and in their weakness, they found strength.
That's right. And isn't that the beauty of grace? It meets us where we are, in our imperfections and our vulnerabilities, and empowers us to do things we could never do on our own.
Absolutely. So if we're feeling overwhelmed by our mountains, if our faith feels small and shaky, this chapter is a powerful reminder to not give up.
Right. It's like that beautiful image of the mustard seed taking root and growing into something strong and magnificent.
Yeah.
It reminds us that even the tiniest spark of faith, when planted in that fertile soil of God's love and nurtured through prayer, obedience, and a willingness to trust, can blossom into something extraordinary.
It can move mountains, it can break chains, it can heal brokenness, and it can transform our lives from the inside out.
And that's really the message we want to leave you with today. This chapter isn't just a story.
Right.
It's an invitation.
Yes.
An invitation to embrace faith, not as some magical formula, but as a journey.
Yes.
A relationship, a way of life that can empower us to overcome any obstacle and live a life that's filled with purpose and meaning. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the power of faith, we invite you to subscribe to our channel for more explorations like this. We have a whole library of episodes waiting to be discovered, covering a wide range of fascinating topics. Until next time, keep seeking, keep believing, and keep trusting in the God who can move mountains.